Hello, and welcome to Blessed Sleep, where faith meets rest through the timeless wisdom of Scripture. Tonight, we will share the journey of a young woman named Deborah, a narrative inspired by Psalm 139. This story explores the profound truth that we are intimately known by God, fearfully and wonderfully made, and never truly alone even in our deepest solitude. It teaches us about divine omniscience, the inescapable presence of God, and the comfort of being completely seen and still completely loved. While you listen, allow these faith-filled words to envelop you, bringing tranquility to your mind and renewal to your spirit. Let the gentle guidance of biblical wisdom lead you to a place of complete peace, resting in the presence of God. If this video blesses you, I would be deeply grateful if you could take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows me to continue sharing God's wisdom through these stories, creating more content designed to bring peace and spiritual refreshment through Scripture-inspired narratives. Now, take a deep breath, settle into the presence of God, and let us begin tonight's journey through this blessed story. The first pale light of dawn had not yet touched the hills surrounding Jerusalem when Deborah opened her eyes. She lay very still on her sleeping mat, listening to the silence of the house around her. Her father's gentle breathing came from the next room, steady and peaceful. Outside, the city was beginning to stir with the soft sounds of morning, a rooster's distant call, the whisper of wind through the olive trees, the faint bleating of sheep being led to pasture. But inside Deborah's chest, there was only the hollow ache of loneliness that had become her constant companion. She was 19 years old, unmarried, and increasingly certain that she would remain so. Not because she was unlovely. Her mother had often said she had eyes like dark honey and hair that caught the sunlight like woven bronze. Not because her family was poor or disgraced. Her father, Joachim, was a respected stonecutter who had worked on the temple itself, and their family line could be traced back to the tribe of Judah with pride. No, Deborah's isolation came from something less visible but more profound. She had always been different. While other girls her age gathered at the well to gossip and giggle, she preferred to sit alone on the hillside, watching the clouds change shape and wondering about the nature of God. While they spoke of betrothals and babies and the management of households, she asked questions that made the rabbis uncomfortable. If God is everywhere, can he see into the darkness of the human heart? If he knows all things, does he know our thoughts before we think them? If he is so vast and powerful, why would he care about someone as small and insignificant as her? These questions had earned her a reputation. Peculiar, the women called her. Too much thinking for a girl, the men said, shaking their heads. Even her own father, who loved her dearly, sometimes looked at her with a mixture of pride and worry, as if she were a puzzle he could not quite solve. And so Deborah had learned to keep her questions to herself, to smile politely when the other young women invited her to their gatherings, to decline with excuses that grew thinner each time. She had learned to be alone. But learning to be alone and learning not to feel lonely were two very different things. This morning, as she rose and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders against the cool air, the weight of that loneliness pressed particularly heavy on her chest. Today was the first day of the Festival of Weeks, Shavuot, when the whole community would gather to celebrate the wheat harvest and remember the giving of the Torah at Sinai. It was a day of communal joy, of shared meals and songs and worship, and Deborah dreaded it. She moved quietly through the small house, not wanting to wake her father yet. In the courtyard, She splashed water on her face from the clay basin, the shock of cold making her gasp softly. She looked up at the sky, where the last stars were fading like distant memories. Somewhere up there, beyond the vast expanse of heaven, was God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had parted the Red Sea and brought water from rocks, the God who knew the number of stars in the sky. Did such a God know her name? Did he see her standing here alone in this courtyard, feeling small and forgotten? Or was she, as she sometimes feared, simply too insignificant to register on the vast scale of divine awareness? "You are awake early, daughter." Deborah turned to find her father emerging from the house, his prayer shawl already draped over his shoulders. Joachim was a sturdy man with hands scarred and calloused from years of working stone, but his eyes were gentle, especially when they looked at his only child. "I could not sleep, Abba," she admitted. He came to stand beside her, looking up at the same fading stars. "The festival troubles you?" It was not a question. Her father knew her too well. "I do not belong there," she said softly, "among all those people, so happy, so connected to each other. I stand in the middle of the crowd and feel more alone than when I am by myself on the hillside." Joachim was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When I work with stone, I must know it intimately. Each piece of limestone, each block of marble, they are not all the same. Some are hard, some are soft. Some have veins that make them beautiful, but also fragile. Some are plain, but incredibly strong. To work the stone properly, I must understand its nature, see into its very substance. I must know it." Deborah looked at her father, waiting for him to continue. "There is a psalm," he said, "written by King David. Your mother used to sing it to you when you were a baby, though you were too young to remember. It speaks of God's intimate knowledge of each person. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar." The whole psalm is about this, that God knows us more deeply than we know ourselves. But how can that be, Abba? How can the God of all creation possibly know me, one girl among thousands in this city, among millions in the world? Her father smiled, a sad, understanding smile. "That, my daughter, is the mystery. And perhaps it is a mystery you need to explore for yourself. I cannot give you the answer. I can only tell you that the question itself is important, and that seeking the answer is a worthy journey." He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Go," he said. "Take your usual path into the hills today. Spend the morning in solitude if you must, but come to the temple courtyard by midday. Promise me. Even if you feel alone in the crowd, sometimes we must show up anyway. Sometimes the answer finds us when we stop hiding." Deborah nodded, though she was not sure she believed him. "I promise, Abba." As the sun broke over the Mount of Olives, spilling golden light across the Kidron Valley, Deborah made her way out of the city. She took the southeastern gate, where fewer people traveled, and climbed the rocky path she had walked countless times before. This was her sanctuary, a series of limestone terraces dotted with twisted olive trees and wild herbs that released their fragrance when her feet brushed against them. She climbed until Jerusalem lay below her like a model city, the temple gleaming white and gold in the morning sun, smoke from 1,000 cooking fires beginning to rise like prayers into the still air. Up here, she could breathe. Up here, the expectations and judgments of others could not reach her. She found her favorite spot, a flat rock beneath an ancient olive tree whose gnarled trunk spoke of centuries of survival. She sat down, arranged her skirts, and simply breathed. The air smelled of sun-warmed stone and olive leaves, and the distant, indefinable scent of the desert that always lurked at Jerusalem's edges, reminding everyone that life here existed only by the grace of water and God's provision. For a long time, she simply sat, letting her mind wander. She watched a lizard skitter across a nearby stone. She observed ants carrying crumbs of something back to their nest, their tiny bodies bent with effort. She noticed how the morning light changed the color of the hills, transforming them from gray to gold to soft amber. And slowly, as it often did when she allowed herself to be still, her mind began to settle into the deeper questions that haunted her. Who am I, really? Not the person others see, not the person I pretend to be, but the person I am when no one is watching. And does that person matter? Does she have value? Is she known? These were the questions that circled in her mind like birds of prey, never quite landing, never quite leaving. She thought about what her father had said, about God knowing her. The idea was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting, because loneliness was the ache of being unknown, and if God truly knew her, then she was not completely alone. Terrifying, because if God knew her, He knew all of her, the petty jealousies, the bitter thoughts, the moments of anger at Him for making her so different, so unable to fit into the life that seemed to come so easily to everyone else. A voice startled her from her thoughts. "The view is better from up there, if you do not mind the climb." Deborah turned sharply to find an old woman standing a few paces away, leaning on a walking stick. She had not heard anyone approach, and the sight of another person in this private space felt like an intrusion. The woman was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her hair completely white beneath her head covering. But her eyes were sharp and bright, and there was a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as if she knew a secret. "I apologize," the old woman said. "I did not mean to intrude on your solitude, but I saw you sitting here, and I thought perhaps you might benefit from a little conversation, or perhaps I might benefit from it. At my age, one never knows how many conversations remain." Despite her surprise, Deborah found herself not entirely annoyed by the interruption. There was something about the old woman's manner that was disarming, gentle, without being invasive. "You live near here?" Deborah asked. "Near enough. I have a small house on the other side of this hill. I have lived there for more years than I can count, since my husband died and my children scattered to their own lives." She gestured toward the flat rock. "May I sit? These old bones do not stand as easily as they once did." Deborah moved over, making room, and the old woman lowered herself with a soft grunt of effort. "I am called Hannah," the woman said. "Deborah. Ah, like the prophetess and judge. A strong name." "I am not strong," Deborah said before she could stop herself. "I am nothing like her." Hannah tilted her head, studying Deborah with those bright, knowing eyes. "Is that what you believe? That you are not strong?" Deborah looked away, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "I am different. I do not fit anywhere, and I am tired of being alone." "Ah," Hannah said, as if this explained everything. "You feel unseen." The words hit Deborah like a physical blow, so accurate were they. Yes, that was exactly it. She felt unseen, unknown, as if she moved through the world without leaving any impression on it, without mattering to anyone. "Tell me," Hannah said, her voice soft, "what do you see when you look at that tree?" She pointed to a small fig tree growing out of a crack in the rocks below them. Deborah looked at it, confused by the question. "I see a tree." "Look again." "Really look." Deborah focused on the fig tree. It was not particularly remarkable. Small, twisted, its leaves turning slightly brown at the edges from lack of water. "I see. A tree that is struggling. The soil is poor. and there is little water here. And yet it grows, Hannah said. It sends its roots deep into the rock, finding water where there seems to be none. It produces leaves and probably in season fruit. Do you think this tree feels alone because it is not in an orchard surrounded by other fig trees? Deborah almost smiled. Trees do not feel, grandmother. Do they not? I wonder. But even if they do not, God knows this tree. He knows exactly how many leaves it has, how deep its roots go, how many figs it will bear this season. The psalmist wrote, "You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar." If God knows such details about us, His most precious creations made in His own image, how much more must He know about a simple tree? Hannah paused, letting the words settle. And if He knows the tree, growing here where no one sees it, then surely He knows you, Deborah, even when you feel most alone, even when you feel most unseen. You are known, completely, intimately, perfectly known. Deborah felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of longing and resistance. It is easy to say, harder to believe. Of course it is, Hannah agreed. Faith is not about easy belief. It is about wrestling with the hard questions until they transform into something else, something deeper. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "May I tell you a story?" Deborah nodded, surprised to find that she wanted to hear it. "When I was young," Hannah began, "younger than you are now, I too felt alone. My parents had died of fever within days of each other, and I was sent to live with an aunt in a village I did not know. I was shy, awkward, always saying the wrong thing. The other girls mocked me. The boys ignored me. I would walk to the well for water in the early morning or late evening, times when I knew I would not encounter anyone. I became like a shadow, there but not there, present but unseen." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "One night, I went to draw water very late, when the moon was full, and at the well, I found an old rabbi sitting on the stone rim. He should not have been there. It was too late, too dark, and rabbis did not typically sit alone at wells at night. But there he was, and when he saw me, he said my name. 'Hannah,' he said, though I had never met him before. 'Hannah, daughter of David and Ruth, you are seen.'" Deborah felt a chill run down her spine. "How did he know your name?" Hannah smiled. "I never found out. I stammered something, filled my jar, and hurried home. But the next day I could not stop thinking about it. I returned to the well at the same time the following night, hoping to find him again, to ask how he knew me. But he was not there. I asked everyone in the village if they knew of a rabbi who had visited recently. No one had seen him. Then who? I do not know," Hannah said simply. "An angel? A prophet? Or simply an old man who happened to know my name through some ordinary means that I never discovered? But it does not matter who he was. What matters is what his words did to me. They changed everything. Because if one person could see me, truly see me, then perhaps I was not invisible. And if one person could, then perhaps God could. And if God could, then I was never truly alone." She looked at Deborah intently. "That moment began my journey, not to become less alone by surrounding myself with people, but to understand that loneliness is not about being alone. It is about feeling unknown. And I had to discover slowly, painfully, over many years, that I was known, deeply, completely, impossibly known by the one who made me." Deborah felt tears prick her eyes. "How did you discover it?" "By paying attention," Hannah said. "By noticing the ways God revealed himself in small things. By learning to be still enough to hear the voice that speaks not with sound, but with presence. by accepting that some questions do not have answers we can hold in our hands, but only truths we can hold in our hearts. She stood slowly, using her walking stick for support. I should let you return to your solitude, child, but perhaps your solitude today might be different. Perhaps instead of sitting here feeling unseen, you might sit here and try to notice all the ways you are seen. The sun sees you. It warms your face. The wind sees you. It moves your hair. The earth sees you. It holds your weight. And God, she paused, letting the word hang in the air, God sees you in ways you cannot yet imagine. With that, the old woman began to make her way slowly down the path, her walking stick tapping against the stones. Deborah watched her go, feeling as if something had shifted, though she could not name what it was. She sat for a long time after Hannah disappeared from view, thinking about the old woman's words. Seen, known. The concepts felt both foreign and deeply desired. She looked around at the landscape with new attention, trying to do what Hannah had suggested, to notice the ways she was seen. The sun did warm her face. She had never thought about it that way before, but it was true. The light touched her, knew the exact curve of her cheek, the specific spot where her nose cast a shadow. The wind did move her hair, each individual strand, as if each one mattered, as if each one deserved the wind's attention. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap. These were her hands, unlike anyone else's hands in all the world. The particular pattern of lines on her palms, the small scar on her right thumb from a kitchen accident when she was 7, the shape of her fingernails, all of it specific, particular, unique. If God had made her, had he not paid attention to these details? Had he not known, as he formed her, exactly what she would become? The thought was overwhelming, too large to hold. She felt it slipping away even as she tried to grasp it. But something remained, a seed, perhaps, a small, tender beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, she was not as invisible as she felt. The morning wore on. The sun climbed higher, and the day grew warm. Deborah knew she should begin making her way back to Jerusalem if she was going to keep her promise to her father. But she found herself reluctant to leave this place, this moment of almost peace. Finally, she stood and brushed the dust from her skirts. She took one last look at the view, Jerusalem below, the hills rolling away in every direction, the vast sky above, and for the first time she did not feel oppressed by the vastness. Instead, she felt held by it, as if all that space was not emptiness, but presence, not void, but fullness. The walk back to Jerusalem took her through narrow streets that were now crowded with festival preparations. Families were setting up tables in their courtyards, arranging the first fruits of the harvest for the celebration. Children ran through the streets, their laughter high and bright. The smell of baking bread filled the air, mixing with the scent of roasting meat and the smoke of cooking fires. Deborah moved through it all feeling slightly apart, as she always did. But somehow the apartness felt less painful now. She observed rather than longed. She noticed the specific joy on a mother's face as she corrected her small son's attempt to carry a jug that was too large for him. She saw the tender way an elderly man helped his wife down from their doorway, his hand steady on her elbow. She heard the laughter of young women arranging flowers, their voices rising and falling like music. All of these people, all of these specific, particular people, living their specific, particular lives. And God knew each of them, the psalmist said. Not just knew of them, but knew them intimately, completely. If that was true, if God truly held such detailed knowledge of each person, then the vastness of his mind was beyond anything she could comprehend. She reached the Temple Mount by midday, as promised. The outer courtyard was packed with people, more than Deborah had ever seen. Pilgrims had come from all over Judea and even from Galilee and beyond to celebrate Shavuot in Jerusalem. The noise was overwhelming. Thousands of voices raised in conversation, prayer, and song. The temple itself gleamed in the sun, its white stones almost painful to look at directly. Deborah stood at the edge of the courtyard, feeling her familiar anxiety rise. So many people, so much noise and motion and life, and she, standing still in the midst of it all, unseen, unknown. But then she remembered Hannah's words, seen, known. She closed her eyes and tried to feel it, tried to believe it. Somewhere beyond all these people, beyond the sky itself, there was a God who saw her, right here, right now. A God who knew not just that she was here, but how she felt, what she feared, what she hoped for, and did not dare to name. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. The words of the psalm her father had mentioned came to her, though she could not remember where she had heard them before. Perhaps her mother had sung them, as her father said. Perhaps they had been sleeping in her memory all this time, waiting for this moment. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. The words felt true in a way that intellectual understanding did not. They bypassed her mind and went straight to that deep place inside her where truth lived before words could name it. She opened her eyes and looked around the courtyard with new vision. All these people, and God knew each one. The thought should have made her feel smaller, less significant. Instead, it made her feel connected. If God knew her and God knew them, then there was a web of divine knowledge connecting them all, even if they did not see it, even if they did not know each other. She spotted her father on the far side of the courtyard, speaking with a group of other stonecutters. His face was animated, his hands gesturing as he made some point. She had seen him like this countless times, but now she looked at him and thought, God knows him. God knows the way his beard is going gray at the edges. God knows the pain in his back from years of bending over stone. God knows how much he loves his daughter, even when he does not understand her. The thought brought tears to her eyes. Her father was known. She was known. They were all known, every single person in this courtyard, every single person in the world. Known completely, and yet the knowing did not crush them. It held them. It made them real. Deborah! She turned to find a young woman approaching her, someone she recognized from her neighborhood, but did not know well. The girl's name was Sarah, and she had always seemed kind, though Deborah had never taken the time to really talk to her. I am so glad you came, Sarah said, her smile genuine. My mother is setting up our table over there, and we have more food than we could possibly eat. Will you join us? I know you usually prefer to be alone, but I would like it if you came. Truly. Deborah's first instinct was to decline, to make an excuse, to retreat back into her comfortable isolation. But something made her pause. Hannah's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes we must show up anyway. Sometimes the answer finds us when we stop hiding. I would like that, Deborah heard herself say. Thank you. Sarah's face brightened, and she linked her arm through Deborah's, guiding her through the crowd. They wove between families and groups of pilgrims, between merchants selling festival goods and children chasing each other in games of tag. And Deborah noticed that with Sarah's arm in hers, she did not feel quite so lost in the crowd. She felt anchored, connected, present. Sarah's family had set up their table in the shade of one of the colonnade pillars. Her mother was a warm, round woman who welcomed Deborah as if she had been expected all along. Her father was quiet but kind. nodding his greeting. Sarah had two younger brothers who were more interested in running off to play than in sitting at the table, and a grandmother who sat in a place of honor, blessing everyone who came near. As they settled to eat, Deborah found herself drawn into the conversation almost against her will. Sarah's mother asked about her father's work, and Deborah found herself telling stories about Joachim's craft, about the way he spoke to the stone as if it could hear him, about his pride in having worked on the temple. Sarah's father spoke about his work as a weaver, about the meditation of the loom, the way patterns emerged from individual threads. It is like God's work, he said thoughtfully. Each thread alone is just a thread, but woven together, they become something beautiful, something useful. Each thread must be in its specific place, playing its specific role. No thread is unimportant. Deborah thought about this, about individual threads in a larger pattern. Was that what people were? Individual threads that only made sense in the context of the whole? But even as the thought formed, she knew it was not quite right. Because the psalm spoke of God knowing each person individually, not just as part of a pattern, but as themselves. You discern my thoughts from afar, not humanity's thoughts, not the community's thoughts, my thoughts, individual, specific, particular. As the meal progressed, Deborah found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around others. Sarah's family asked her opinion, listened when she spoke, laughed at her small attempts at humor. They did not seem to find her strange or off-putting. They simply welcomed her. When the meal was finished and the afternoon prayers were beginning, Sarah's mother touched Deborah's hand. Gently, you should come to our home for Sabbath dinner sometime. Any Sabbath. You would be most welcome. Deborah felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Thank you. I would like that very much. As the prayers began, Deborah stood among the crowd of worshipers, her voice joining thousands of others in the ancient words. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel alone in the middle of the crowd. She felt part of something larger than herself, but not lost in it. She felt like an individual thread in a vast tapestry, valuable both for herself and for her place in the whole. The prayers ended, and the crowd began to disperse. Families gathered their belongings, preparing to continue the celebration in their homes. Deborah found her father and walked with him back through the city streets as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. You came, he said, stating the obvious because the true meaning was in the tone. You kept your promise. You showed up even though it was hard. I am proud of you. I did, she said simply. And it was not as terrible as I feared. I met Sarah from our neighborhood. Her family was very kind. Good, Joachim said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. That is very good. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls of the narrow street. Then Deborah said, Abba, the psalm you mentioned this morning, do we have a copy of it? I would like to read it myself. Her father's face lit up. We do. Your mother's father was a scribe, and he copied several psalms for us before he died. I will find it for you when we get home. That evening, after a simple meal, Joachim brought out a small scroll, its parchment worn soft with age and handling. This is it, he said, placing it carefully in Deborah's hands. Psalm 139, attributed to King David. Deborah unrolled it carefully, her eyes moving over the Hebrew script that her mother had taught her to read when she was a child. The words were beautiful, poetic, intimate. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. She read slowly, drinking in each phrase. The psalm spoke of God's comprehensive knowledge of the psalmist, not just observation from a distance, but intimate familiarity. God knew the psalmist's sitting and rising, his comings and goings, his thoughts before they were fully formed, his words before they were spoken. The psalm continued, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast." This was the part that caught in Deborah's throat. There was nowhere she could go where God was not. No height too high, no depth too deep, no distance too far, even if she wanted to escape God's presence. And part of her, she realized, had been trying to do exactly that, had been hiding in her aloneness as a way of protecting herself from the vulnerability of being truly seen. Even then, she could not. God was always there, but the psalm did not present this as a threat. It presented it as comfort. Your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. Being known was not the same as being judged. Being seen was not the same as being condemned. God's knowledge was accompanied by God's guidance, God's holding, God's presence. She read on, "If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." Deborah thought about all the darkness she carried inside herself, the jealousy, the bitterness, the anger, the fear, all the things she tried to hide from others, all the things she sometimes tried to hide from herself. The psalm said that God saw into that darkness, and to him it was as light. He was not fooled by her pretenses. He was not deceived by her carefully maintained exterior. He saw it all. And still, the psalm suggested he was there. His hand still guided. His right hand still held fast. The psalm's culmination came in verses that made Deborah's breath catch. "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." She read these lines over and over, letting each word sink deep into her consciousness. God had created her inmost being, not just her body, but her soul, her mind, her particular way of thinking and feeling and seeing the world. He had knit her together in her mother's womb, a deliberate, careful act of creation, like her father working stone or Sarah's father working his loom, but infinitely more intimate, more precise. She was fearfully and wonderfully made, not despite her differences, but including them. The questions she asked that made others uncomfortable, the solitary nature that set her apart, the deep hunger for understanding that drove her to the hillsides while others gathered at the well. All of this was part of how God had made her. It was not a mistake. It was not a flaw to be corrected. It was her particular design, her specific way of reflecting the divine image. And God had seen her unformed body. Before she existed, He had known what she would be. All her days were written in His book before a single one of them had come to pass. This meant that her life, with all its loneliness and questions and struggles, was not random. It was not meaningless. It was known, planned, held within the vast scope of God's awareness. Deborah sat with the scroll in her lap, tears streaming down her face. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of relief, of a burden she had not even fully recognized she was carrying beginning to lift. "Daughter," her father's voice was concerned, "are you well?" She looked up at him, and through her tears she smiled. "Yes, Abba. For the first time in a very long time, I think I am well." That night, Deborah lay on her sleeping mat, unable to sleep despite the lateness of the hour and the exhaustion of the day. Her mind kept returning to the words of the psalm, turning them over like smooth stones, examining them from every angle. She thought about Hannah, the old woman on the hillside. Had that encounter been chance? Or had God known that Deborah would be on that hillside this morning, known that she would need to hear exactly those words at exactly that moment? If all her days were written in God's book, then perhaps that meeting had been written too, ordained before either of them was born. The thought was staggering. It suggested a level of divine attention and care that her mind could barely grasp. Not just general providence, not just vague oversight, but specific, detailed, personal involvement in the smallest moments of her life. She thought about Sarah's invitation, about the unexpected warmth of that family's welcome. Had that too been ordained? Had God known that she needed that experience of being seen and welcomed, needed it today, on this particular day when she had been wrestling so hard with her loneliness? If she accepted the premise of the psalm, that God knew her completely, had made her specifically, watched over her constantly, then nothing in her life was truly random. Everything had meaning, even if she could not always see it, especially the hard things, especially the loneliness that had driven her to ask these questions in the first place. She rose from her mat and went to the window, looking out at the night sky. The stars were brilliant, thousands upon thousands of them scattered across the vast darkness. She had always loved the stars, but had also been oppressed by them, by the reminder of how small she was in comparison to the universe. But now, looking up at them, she thought, God knows each star. He knows their number, their position, their particular light, and He knows me with the same completeness, the same attention to detail. I am not lost in the vastness. I am held within it, known within it, precious within it. The psalm ended with words that now felt like a prayer rising from her own heart. "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." The words felt like her own breath, her own heartbeat. They were not just ancient poetry written by a long-dead king. They were her prayer, rising from the deepest part of her being. "Lead me in the way everlasting," she whispered to the stars, to the God who had made them, to the presence she was beginning to believe had been with her all along, even in her loneliness, especially in her loneliness. She returned to her sleeping mat, but this time, when she lay down, the hollow ache in her chest had changed. It was still there. She did not expect years of loneliness to vanish in a single day, but it felt different now, less like emptiness and more like space. Space for something new to grow, space for understanding to deepen, space for God's presence to fill. She fell asleep with the words of the psalm still moving through her mind like a gentle current, carrying her into dreams where she walked through vast landscapes, never alone, always known, always held. Part 2. The Journey. Wave 1. The Desert of Testing. The days that followed the Festival of Weeks brought changes to Deborah's life, subtle at first, like the first pale light before dawn. She continued her morning walks to the hillside, But now she went not to escape, but to seek. The solitude that had once felt like exile now felt like sanctuary. She would sit beneath the ancient olive tree and read from the scroll of Psalm 139 that her father had given her, letting each word sink deeper into her understanding. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. She would close her eyes and try to sense it, this divine hemming in, this encircling presence. Sometimes she felt it, or thought she did. Other times there was only the wind and the distant sounds of the city and her own breathing. But even the emptiness felt different now, less oppressive, more expectant. Sarah kept her invitation. 3 Sabbaths after the festival, Deborah found herself at Sarah's family table again, and then again the following week, and the week after that. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she was being woven into the fabric of their family life. Sarah's mother, whose name was Miriam, had a gift for making people feel seen. She would ask Deborah questions that were not merely polite, but genuinely curious. What did Deborah think about the rabbi's teaching that week? Had she noticed how the light changed as summer deepened? What were her favorite passages in the Torah? At first, Deborah answered cautiously, afraid that her honest responses would reveal how different she was, how strange her questions were. But Miriam never recoiled. Instead, she would nod thoughtfully and say things like, "I have wondered that too," or "What an interesting way to see it." Sarah herself became a true friend. Unlike the other young women who had excluded Deborah, Sarah seemed to genuinely value her perspective. They would walk together to the well in the early mornings, and Sarah would talk about her hopes for marriage, her concerns about her younger brothers, her dreams of one day having a household of her own. And she would ask Deborah about her thoughts, her questions, her inner life. "You think so deeply about everything," Sarah said one morning as they walked back from the well, their water jugs balanced on their shoulders. "It used to frighten me a little, if I am honest, but now I think it is beautiful. You see layers in everything that I miss." Deborah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple acceptance in Sarah's words. Most people think it is peculiar, too much thinking for a girl. Sarah laughed. "Perhaps they are right that it is peculiar, but who says peculiar is bad? The prophet Jeremiah was peculiar. The prophetess Deborah, your namesake, was peculiar. Maybe God needs peculiar people to see things others cannot." The thought stayed with Deborah long after they parted ways. Maybe God needs peculiar people. Maybe her difference was not a flaw but a function. Maybe the very things that set her apart were the things that allowed her to seek God in ways others did not. But even as friendships deepened and the sharp edge of loneliness began to dull, Deborah found herself wrestling with new questions. If God truly knew her, if he truly saw every thought and mapped every step, then why did life still feel so uncertain? Why did the future stretch before her like an unmarked path through wilderness? It was during this season of inner wrestling that she began to have dreams. They started a month after Shavuot, on a night when the heat was oppressive and sleep came fitfully. In the dream, she was walking through a landscape she did not recognize. Hills more barren than the ones around Jerusalem, stone sharper, sky more vast. She was looking for something, though she did not know what. The dream had the quality of deep significance, as if every stone and shadow carried meaning she could not quite grasp. She woke before dawn, her heart pounding, the dream still vivid in her mind. She rose and went to the courtyard, splashing water on her face, trying to shake the strange urgency the dream had left behind. The dreams continued. Sometimes she was in the wilderness. sometimes in a great crowd where she searched for a face she could not name. Sometimes she was standing at the edge of an abyss, not frightened, but curious, wondering what lay beyond. Sometimes she heard a voice calling her name, but when she turned, there was no one there. She mentioned the dreams to her father one evening as they ate their simple meal. Dreams can be messages, Joachim said thoughtfully. The patriarchs received dreams. Joseph interpreted them. But dreams can also be simply the mind processing the day's events. These feel different, Abba. They feel like something is calling me, but I do not know what or where. Her father was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful in the lamplight. When I was a young man, before I met your mother, I felt a similar calling. I could not name it either. It was like a restlessness in my bones, a sense that I was meant to be somewhere else, doing something else. I tried to ignore it, but it grew stronger. What did you do? I went on a journey, he said, a pilgrimage of sorts. I told my father I wanted to visit the temple in Jerusalem. We lived in Bethlehem then, but truly I was seeking an answer to that nameless call. I walked slowly, stopping in every village, speaking with rabbis and craftsmen and shepherds. I was looking for something I could not name. Did you find it? Joachim smiled. I found your mother. She was visiting relatives in a village between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. We met at a well, like in the old stories, and the moment I saw her, I knew the calling had been leading me to her, to the life we would build together, to you. He reached across the table and took Deborah's hand. I am not saying your calling is to find a husband, daughter. I am saying that sometimes we must follow the restlessness even when we do not understand it. Sometimes we must walk into the unknown, trusting that the God who knows us will guide us to where we need to be. That night, Deborah lay awake for hours, turning her father's words over in her mind. The restlessness he described was exactly what she felt. It had been there for months now, growing stronger, like a tide rising in her chest. She thought again of the psalm, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." The words suggested that no journey could take her beyond God's presence. If that was true, then perhaps the journey itself was the point. Perhaps she needed to walk into the unknown, not to find God. He was already with her, but to discover what he had been trying to teach her all along. The decision formed slowly over the following weeks, like water seeping into stone. She would go on a pilgrimage, not just to the temple, she had been there countless times, but beyond. She would travel to some of the holy sites she had only heard about. The ancient oaks of Mamre, where Abraham had entertained angels, the well at Beersheba, where Hagar had encountered God, Mount Gerizim, where the blessings had been proclaimed. When she finally spoke the plan aloud to her father, she expected resistance. Instead, his eyes filled with tears. "I have been waiting for you to say this," he said quietly. "I have watched you wrestling, searching, and I knew that you would need to make this journey. Your mother would have understood. She had a seeking heart like yours. You would let me go, a woman traveling alone? You will not be entirely alone. There are caravans of pilgrims traveling all summer to various holy sites. I will arrange for you to join a reputable group. And beyond that," he smiled, "you will not be alone, will you? The psalm tells us that." And so the preparations began. Sarah wept when Deborah told her, but they were tears of understanding rather than protest. "I wish I had your courage," Sarah said, embracing her friend. "I will pray for you every day, and I will be here when you return, eager to hear every detail of what you learn. Miriam packed a traveling bag for Deborah with practical efficiency, an extra tunic, a warm cloak, dried figs and almonds, a small clay lamp, flint for fire. But she also tucked in something unexpected, a small scroll. "These are prayers," Miriam said, "some from the Psalms, some that have been passed down in my family. Read them when you feel afraid or uncertain. Let them remind you that countless women before you have walked difficult paths and found God faithful." The day of departure came with the soft light of early summer. Joachim walked with Deborah to the city gate where the caravan was gathering. It was a group of about 20 people, families going to visit relatives, merchants traveling to trade, and a handful of other pilgrims seeking various holy sites. The caravan leader was a man named Eleazar, grizzled and practical, who had made this journey dozens of times. He assessed Deborah with a quick glance, noting her youth and gender, but whatever he thought, he kept to himself. "We leave at sunup," he said. "We walk until midday, rest through the heat, walk again until dusk. Anyone who cannot keep pace will be left behind. Anyone who causes trouble will be sent back. Anyone who follows instructions will arrive safely." "Understood?" Deborah nodded. Joachim embraced his daughter one last time. "Remember," he whispered into her hair, "you are known, you are seen, you are never alone." Then the caravan began to move, and Deborah walked through the gate and onto the road that led south and east, away from everything familiar into the unknown. On the first hours of walking were disorienting. Deborah had walked to her hillside sanctuary countless times, but this was different. Each step took her farther from home, from the city whose walls and streets she knew by heart, from the life she had always lived. The land around Jerusalem was rocky and sparse, dotted with olive groves and fig trees, striped with ancient terraced fields where farmers coaxed wheat and barley from the thin soil. The road itself was old, worn smooth by centuries of feet and hooves and cartwheels. It curved around hills, descended into dry wadis, climbed again toward distant ridges. Deborah walked near the back of the caravan, not quite part of any family group, but not entirely separate either. She observed the others, a young couple with 2 small children, the woman pregnant with a third, an elderly man traveling alone, his prayer shawl visible beneath his cloak, his lips moving constantly in what might have been prayer or memory. 3 merchants who talked loudly about prices and politics. A family of 6, cheerful and chaotic, the children ranging from a babe in arms to a girl about 12 who kept looking at Deborah with curious eyes. By midday, when Eleazar called the halt, Deborah's feet ached and her water skin was nearly empty. They stopped in the shade of a cluster of terebinth trees, and people immediately began the familiar rituals of rest, spreading cloaks to sit on, sharing food, checking blisters, adjusting loads. Deborah found a spot slightly apart from the others and sat down, grateful to be off her feet. She drank sparingly from her water skin. Eleazar had warned them that the next well was still hours away, and ate a handful of almonds. "You travel alone?" She looked up to find the elderly man standing nearby. Up close, she could see that his face was deeply lined, his beard mostly white, but his eyes were sharp and kind. "I do," Deborah said. "A pilgrimage?" "Yes, I seek understanding." The old man nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "May I sit?" She gestured to the space beside her, and he lowered himself with a soft grunt. "I am Simeon," he said, "from a village near Hebron. I travel to Ein Gedi, to the springs. I go there once each year to pray and remember." "Remember what?" "Many things, but mostly I remember that God is faithful. The springs at Ein Gedi never run dry, you see. Year after year, decade after decade, the water flows. It is a picture of God's faithfulness, constant, life-giving, never failing. Deborah thought about this. Do you ever doubt that faithfulness? Simeon smiled. Every day. I am old, young one, and my faith has been tested many times. I have lost a wife, 3 children, a home, most of my possessions at various times. I have cried out to God in anger. I have shaken my fist at heaven. I have sat in ashes and demanded answers. He paused. And yet, here I am, walking to Ein Gedi to remember his faithfulness. Because despite everything, despite all my doubts and all my anger, I have found that he is there, always there, like those springs, constant, life-giving, never failing. How do you know it is truly God you are encountering and not just hope or imagination? Ah, Simeon said, the question of the seeking heart. I cannot prove it to you, child. Faith is not something that can be demonstrated like a mathematical theorem. But I can tell you this. There have been moments in my life when I have been known in a way that is impossible to explain. Moments when I have felt seen, understood, held by something, by someone far greater than myself. And those moments have sustained me through all the dark times. He reached into his traveling bag and pulled out a worn scroll. Do you know Psalm 139? Deborah's breath caught. Yes, I have been studying it. Then you know what it says. You have searched me and known me, not observed me from a distance, not catalogued my actions, known me intimately, completely, personally. That is the God I have encountered, not the distant, cold deity of the philosophers, but the God who knows Simeon, who knows his sorrows and his joys, his failures and his small victories. The God who, somehow impossibly, cares about one old man walking to a spring in the wilderness. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the others in the caravan. The young mother was nursing her infant. The children were playing a game with stones. The merchants had spread out their wares to check for damage from the morning's walk. Where do you seek understanding, child? Simeon asked eventually. I do not know exactly, Deborah admitted. I thought perhaps at Beersheba or Hebron. I want to visit places where the patriarchs encountered God. I want to understand. I want to know if God truly knows me, not in theory, but in reality. I want to feel it, to be certain of it. Simeon nodded slowly. That is a worthy quest, but I will tell you something I learned long ago. God often reveals himself not at the destination we plan, but along the journey we did not expect. Do not be so focused on reaching the holy sites that you miss the encounters he prepares along the way. Before Deborah could respond, Eleazar was shouting for everyone to prepare to move again. The afternoon portion of the journey was beginning. As they walked through the heat of the day, Deborah thought about Simeon's words, encounters along the way. She looked at the landscape with new attention, the stones beneath her feet, each one unique, shaped by wind and water over countless years. The lizards that darted across the path, the hawk circling overhead, the way the light changed the color of the distant hills from brown to amber to deep purple as the sun moved across the sky. Was God in these details? Did he see this particular lizard, this specific stone, this exact moment when the light turned the hills purple? If he did, if the psalm was true, and God truly saw and knew all things with such completeness, then the vastness of his attention was beyond anything she could comprehend. The thought should have made her feel small. Instead, it made her feel connected to everything around her. The same God who knew her knew the lizard, knew the stone, knew the hawk. There was a web of divine attention holding it all together, seeing it all, knowing it all. They reached the well at dusk. ancient stone structure where a handful of other travelers had already stopped for the night. There was the usual bustle of activity, drawing water, setting up sleeping areas, preparing simple meals over small fires. Deborah found a spot near the well itself, spreading her cloak on the ground. She drew water and drank deeply, the cold liquid soothing her parched throat. Then she sat and simply breathed, letting the day's walking settle in her body. The 12-year-old girl from the large family approached shyly. "May I sit with you?" she asked. Of course. The girl sat down, tucking her knees up under her chin. "I am Ruth," she said. "I have been watching you. You seem different from the others." "Different how?" "Quieter, more thoughtful. Like you're always thinking about something important." Deborah smiled. "Is that good or bad?" "I think it is good," Ruth said earnestly. "Most people do not think about important things. They just live. But you seem like you are searching for something." "I am," Deborah admitted. "I am searching for understanding about God, about myself, about what it means to be truly known." Ruth considered this. "My grandmother says that God knows every sparrow that falls. She says if He knows sparrows, He must know us even more, because we are His special creation." "Do you believe that?" "I want to," Ruth said, "but sometimes I wonder if God really notices me. I am the middle child of 6. Sometimes I feel invisible, even in my own family." Deborah's heart ached with recognition. "I know that feeling," she said softly. "I have felt invisible most of my life, but I am learning, or trying to learn, that being unseen by people is not the same as being unseen by God." "How do you learn that?" "I do not know yet. That is why I am on this journey. But I think it has something to do with paying attention, noticing the ways God might be revealing Himself, looking for His presence in unexpected places." Ruth nodded thoughtfully. "Will you tell me if you figure it out before we part ways?" "I will," Deborah promised. That night, lying on her cloak under a sky brilliant with stars, Deborah prayed the words of Psalm 139 again, but this time she prayed them not just for herself, but for Ruth, for Simeon, for all the people in the caravan, each one searching in their own way for God's presence, each one hoping to be known, to be seen, to matter. "You know when we sit down and when we rise up," she whispered to the stars. "You know Ruth's loneliness and Simeon's grief. You know the young mother's exhaustion and the old merchant's worries. You know all of us, completely and perfectly. Help us to know that we are known." As Wave 2, Encounters and Revelations. The days blurred into a rhythm of walking, resting, walking again. The landscape slowly changed as they traveled south. The hills became more arid, the vegetation sparser, the sky somehow larger. They passed through small villages where children ran out to stare at the caravan and vendors sold bread and cheese and olives. On the 4th day, they reached Hebron. The ancient city rose from the hills like a crown of stone, its walls weathered by millennia, its streets narrow and winding. This was the city of the patriarchs, where Abraham had lived, where Sarah had died and been buried in the cave of Machpelah. The weight of history pressed on every stone. Eleazar announced they would rest here for 2 days, allowing those who wished to visit the holy sites and allowing others to trade in the markets. The caravan would reassemble at dawn on the 3rd day. Deborah found lodging at a small inn run by a widow named Leah. It was a simple place, a courtyard with a few rooms opening off it, a well in the center, a cooking area where Leah prepared meals for her guests. That first evening, after washing the dust of travel from her face and hands, Deborah climbed to the roof of the inn to watch the sunset. She could see across the city to the hills beyond, their contours softening in the fading light. Beautiful, is it not? She turned to find Leah standing at the top of the stairs, carrying a small oil lamp. It is, Deborah agreed. I have never been so far from Jerusalem before. Leah came to stand beside her at the low wall that edged the roof. She was perhaps 50, her face kind, but worn by years of hard work and grief. Jerusalem is the heart, she said, but Hebron is the root. Abraham walked these streets. Sarah drew water from these wells. Isaac and Rebekah lived here. Jacob and Leah, my namesake, knew these hills. When you stand here, you stand on the same stones as the fathers and mothers of our faith. Deborah felt the truth of this settle over her like a blanket. Does it ever feel like they are present? Like the past is somehow still alive here? Every day, Leah said simply. I talk to Sarah sometimes when I am kneading bread or drawing water. I tell her about my struggles, my loneliness. I imagine what she might say to me. It helps. You are lonely? Leah smiled sadly. My husband died 5 years ago. My children have scattered to their own lives. I run this inn and I fill my days with work. But yes, I am lonely. Not always, but often. Especially in the evenings when I remember sitting with my husband in the courtyard, talking about the day, planning tomorrow. How do you bear it? I bear it because I must, and because I have learned that loneliness is not the worst thing. The worst thing would be to close my heart entirely, to stop caring, to stop hoping. So I stay open. I welcome travelers. I listen to their stories. I offer what comfort I can. And sometimes, in the act of serving others, I find that my own loneliness eases a little. They stood together in the deepening dusk, watching the first stars appear. Deborah thought about what Leah had said, that loneliness was not the worst thing, that staying open was important. It resonated with something she was beginning to understand about her own journey. I came on this pilgrimage seeking to understand if God truly knows me, Deborah said. But perhaps part of being known is learning to know others, learning to truly see them as God sees them. Leah looked at her with interest. That is wise for one so young. Yes, I think you are right. We are made in God's image, and part of that image is the capacity to know and be known. When we truly see another person, their pain, their hope, their unique soul, we participate in the divine act of knowing. The next morning, Deborah walked to the cave of Machpelah, the burial place of the patriarchs and matriarchs. The site was ancient, venerated, heavy with the presence of prayer that had soaked into the stones over centuries. She stood before the entrance, listening to the prayers of other pilgrims, feeling the weight of all those who had stood here before her. Abraham had bought this cave to bury Sarah, his beloved wife. It was an act of grief, but also of faith, claiming a piece of the promised land, making a declaration that they belonged here, that their descendants would inherit it. Deborah thought about Sarah, that complicated woman of the Scriptures. She had laughed when God promised her a son in her old age. She had waited decades for that promise to be fulfilled. She had made mistakes. The whole situation with Hagar and Ishmael spoke to her human frailty. But God had still chosen her, still worked through her, still blessed her to become the mother of nations. Did you feel known, Sarah? Deborah whispered to the ancient stones. Did you ever feel invisible, unimportant, forgotten? Or did you always have certainty in God's attention? There was no audible answer, of course, but standing there in the cool shadows of the holy place, Deborah felt something shift in her understanding. Sarah had been fully human, doubtful, impatient, sometimes faithless, and yet God had known her, chosen her, worked through her. Perhaps being known by God did not require perfection. Perhaps it only required presence, being fully oneself, even with all the doubts and questions and failings. She spent hours at the site, praying, thinking, sitting in silence. Other pilgrims came and went. Some wept openly, some prayed with great fervor. Some, like Deborah, simply sat and breathed in the presence of the place. In the afternoon, she walked through the market of Hebron. The streets were crowded, noisy with vendors calling their wares, the bleating of sheep, the cry of children playing. She bought bread from a baker, fresh and warm, and sat on a low wall to eat it, watching the flow of humanity around her. So many people, each one with a complete inner life, each one with hopes and fears, memories and dreams, each one known by God with the same completeness that He knew her. The thought was staggering. She was still sitting there when she noticed an old woman struggling with a heavy water jar. The woman was ancient, bent with age, clearly finding the weight of the jar almost too much to bear. Without thinking, Deborah rose and approached her. "May I help you, grandmother?" The old woman looked up, her face breaking into a smile that revealed missing teeth. "Bless you, child. I live just there, at the end of this street. If you could help me carry it that far." Together, they carried the jar to the old woman's tiny house, hardly more than 2 rooms opening onto a small courtyard. The woman insisted Deborah come in, sit down, drink some water. "I am Tamar," the woman said, settling onto a worn cushion with a sigh of relief. "I have lived in this house for more years than I can count. My husband built it with his own hands, stone by stone. He has been gone now for 20 years, but I still feel him here." Deborah sat and accepted the cup of water Tamar offered. The house was poor but clean. The courtyard swept, a small herb garden growing in clay pots. "You are traveling?" Tamar asked. "A pilgrimage. I am seeking understanding." "Ah," Tamar said, as if this explained everything. "The search for God. I remember that search. I spent many years looking for Him in all the wrong places." "What do you mean?" "I looked for Him in the temple, in the prayers of the rabbis, in the rituals and sacrifices, all good things, mind you. But I was looking for something external, something outside myself, some sign, some miracle, some unmistakable proof that God was real and that He cared about me." "Did you find it?" Tamar smiled. "I did, but not where I expected. I found it here, in this small house, in the daily rhythm of ordinary life. I found it in the way sunlight falls across the courtyard in the morning, in the taste of bread I kneaded with my own hands, in the warmth of my husband's hand in mine at night, in the face of each grandchild born, in the comfort that came when I wept over my husband's death." She paused, her old eyes distant with memory. "You see, child, I learned that God is not only in the extraordinary, He is in the ordinary. He is not only in the temple, but in every home, every heart, every moment. The psalmist says, God knows when we sit down and when we rise up, all the small, mundane moments of our lives. He is present in all of it." Deborah felt tears prick her eyes. "But how do you perceive that presence? How do you know it is real?" "By paying attention," Tamar said simply. "By being awake to life as it is happening. By noticing the small gifts, the cool water when you are thirsty, the shade when you're hot, the friend who appears when you're lonely. Each of these is God saying, I see you, I know you, I am here." They talked for a long time, the afternoon light shifting across the courtyard as the sun moved. Tamar told stories of her life, the hardships, the joys, the moments when God's presence had been undeniable, and the long stretches when His presence had seemed hidden. But through it all, she said, He had been there, always there. When Deborah finally rose to leave, Tamar took her hand. "Whatever you seek, child, I hope you find it. But remember this, sometimes what we seek is already with us. Sometimes we must stop looking outward and learn to look inward, where God's presence dwells in the deepest part of our soul." Walking back through the streets of Hebron as evening fell, Deborah felt something loosening in her chest. The conversations of the past days, with Simeon, with Ruth, with Leah, with Tamar, were weaving together into a larger understanding. Each person she met was teaching her something about being known, about God's presence, about the way divine attention worked itself out in ordinary human lives. That night, she wrote in a small journal she had brought, something her father had given her, made of rough parchment bound with leather cord. She wrote about the conversations, about what she was learning, about the questions that still haunted her. Writing helped her think, helped her capture the insights before they slipped away like water through fingers. "I am beginning to understand," she wrote, "that being known by God is not something separate from ordinary life, but woven all through it. Every encounter, every conversation, every small kindness, these are threads in a larger tapestry that God is weaving, and I am one thread among many, but my thread matters. Its specific color and texture and placement matter because without it, the pattern would be incomplete." She paused, ink hovering over parchment, then continued, "But I still do not feel it completely. I understand it in my mind, but my heart remains uncertain. I need something more, some deeper assurance that I am not just creating comfortable stories to ease my loneliness, but truly encountering something real." The caravan left Hebron on the third day, continuing south and east toward Beersheba. The landscape grew more desert-like, the vegetation sparse, the heat more intense. They traveled through the morning and then rested through the worst of the midday sun, resuming their journey in the late afternoon when the heat began to ease. On the second day after leaving Hebron, something unexpected happened. They were crossing a particularly barren stretch when one of the children in the large family, not Ruth, but her younger brother, a boy of perhaps 8, suddenly cried out and collapsed. His mother reached him first, gathering him into her arms, her face pale with fear. "He burns with fever," she said, her voice shaking. "And look, these spots on his skin." The caravan came to an immediate halt. People gathered around but maintained distance, fear evident on their faces. Illness in the desert was dangerous. There was little water, no physician, limited supplies. Eleazar approached, assessed the situation, and made a quick decision. "We cannot risk the whole caravan. The family must stay here with the sick child. We will mark this location and send help from Beersheba if we can." The mother began to weep. The father stood pale and silent, clearly torn between the need to protect his other children and the impossibility of leaving his sick son. It was Ruth who spoke, her young voice clear and certain. "I will stay with him. The rest of you go on. I am old enough to help mother and father care for my brother." "No," her mother said immediately. "No, Ruth, we cannot risk you too." But Ruth's face was set with determination. "Someone must stay, and I am the oldest. It is my responsibility." Deborah watched this scene unfold, her heart aching. She thought of Ruth's confession that she often felt invisible in her large family. And here she was, stepping forward to be seen, to matter, to make a choice that would affect everyone. And in that moment, Deborah knew what she had to do. "I will stay as well," she heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. Eleazar frowned. "You have no obligation to these people." "I know, but I will stay anyway." Simeon, who had been standing nearby, spoke up. "As will I. These folks will need help, and I have tended sick people before." The father of the family looked between them, his eyes filling with tears. "Why would you do this? You do not know us." "No," Deborah said, "but God knows us all, and sometimes we must be His hands and feet to each other." And so it was decided. The caravan would continue. 3 families and 2 merchants would go on to Beersheba. But Deborah, Simeon, Ruth, and the sick boy's family would remain here, at this desolate spot marked only by a few stones and a dying acacia tree. Eleazar left them what supplies he could spare: extra water skins, some food, blankets, a tent. "I will send help from Beersheba," he promised. 3 days' journey there, 3 days back. Hold on for 6 days. And then the caravan moved on, disappearing into the shimmering heat of the desert, leaving behind 6 people huddled around a sick child in a landscape that seemed designed to emphasize human fragility. The Gashglaha waved the 3, the Valley of Shadow. The first day was the hardest. They set up the tent to give some shade, but the heat was relentless. The boy, his name was Levi, burned with fever, his small body shaking despite the heat. His mother, Rachel, held him constantly, singing soft prayers, her face drawn with fear. His father, Benjamin, paced restlessly, scanning the horizon as if he could will help to appear through sheer force of desire. Ruth proved herself remarkably capable. She organized their limited supplies, rationed the water with careful precision, created makeshift shade using the spare cloaks. She moved with quiet efficiency, her young face set with determination that reminded Deborah of herself, a girl becoming more than she thought she could be through necessity and choice. Simeon, true to his word, had experience with illness. He prepared cool compresses from their precious water supply, placing them on Levi's forehead, neck, and wrists. He made the boy drink small sips frequently, even when Levi protested weakly. He prayed over him in a low, steady voice that seemed to anchor them all. And Deborah found herself doing what she did best, observing, thinking, and discovering unexpected truths in the midst of crisis. She noticed how Benjamin's hands trembled when he looked at his son. She saw how Rachel's lips moved constantly in silent prayer, her faith a lifeline she clung to with white-knuckled desperation. She watched Ruth's careful movements, each action a prayer of its own, spoken through service rather than words. On the second day, as the sun reached its merciless zenith, Deborah sat in the small patch of shade created by the tent, fanning Levi with a palm branch she had found near the dying acacia tree. The repetitive motion was hypnotic, allowing her mind to drift even as her body served. She thought about the psalm again. "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence?" Here, in this desolate place, it would be easy to feel abandoned by God. The landscape offered no comfort, only endless stone and sand, heat that seemed designed to break human will, silence so profound it pressed against the ears like physical weight. They were far from the temple, far from Jerusalem's comforting walls, far from anything that spoke of divine presence or care. And yet, she looked at Simeon, kneeling beside Levi, replacing the compress with gentle hands. She looked at Ruth, carefully measuring out water for the evening meal. She looked at Rachel, still holding her son, still singing, still believing despite everything that God heard her prayers. God was here, not in the landscape, but in the people. Not in the circumstances, but in the choices being made. Not in comfort, but in presence. Their presence with each other. Their choice to stay, to serve, to hope, even when hope seemed foolish. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. The words came to her with new meaning. She had always thought of God's presence as something she needed to seek in special places. The hillside sanctuary, the temple courts, the holy sites of her pilgrimage. But perhaps God's presence was not a location, but a reality. Not something to find, but something to recognize. He was behind her in all the moments that had led to this choice to stay. He was before her in whatever would come next. And his hand was upon her right now in this burning desert, manifested through the hands that served, the hearts that loved, the faith that persisted. That night, Levi's fever broke. Rachel wept with relief, holding her son as he slept naturally for the first time in 2 days. Benjamin embraced Simeon, then Ruth, then even Deborah, his gratitude too large for words. They sat together under the stars, that canopy that had witnessed Abraham's covenant, had guided the Exodus, had looked down on David as he kept his father's sheep. The same stars that would shine over Jerusalem, over her father sleeping in their small house, over Sarah and her family, over every person she had met on this journey. We are all connected, Deborah said softly, speaking her thoughts aloud. Every person, every moment, all woven together by God's knowledge of us. He knew we would be here in this place at this time. He knew Levi would become ill. He knew we would choose to stay. It was all written in his book before any of it came to pass. Simeon nodded slowly. And yet our choices still matter. We could have continued with the caravan. That would also have been written, would it not? The mystery is that both things are true. God knows all, and yet our choices are real and meaningful. How can both be true? Ruth asked. I do not know, Simeon admitted, but I have learned that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only lived within. We make our choices with the freedom we have, and somehow, impossibly, those choices fit into God's larger pattern. We are threads in a tapestry we cannot see, but our color and placement matter. The third day brought a sandstorm. They huddled in the tent as wind screamed around them and sand found its way through every opening. Visibility dropped to nothing. The world became a roaring, stinging chaos of brown and gold. It lasted hours. They sat pressed together, covering their faces with cloth, breathing shallowly, waiting. Levi whimpered, frightened by the noise and the strange twilight the storm created. Rachel sang to him, her voice barely audible above the wind, the same songs she had been singing for 3 days now, songs her mother had taught her, passed down through generations of mothers comforting frightened children. In the enforced stillness of the storm, Deborah found her mind returning again and again to the psalm's most mysterious verses. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully and wonderfully made. She had read those words many times, but she had never fully believed them about herself. She saw herself as the peculiar girl, the one who didn't fit, the one who asked too many questions. But sitting here, in this tent, in this storm, she began to see it differently. Her tendency to observe, to think deeply, to ask difficult questions, these were not flaws. They were part of how God had made her. Her capacity for solitude had prepared her to sit with Levi for hours without restlessness. Her questioning mind helped her understand the deeper meanings in Scripture. Her outsider perspective allowed her to see connections others missed. She was, exactly as she was, necessary. Her specific design had purpose. When the storm finally passed and they emerged, blinking into the late afternoon light, the landscape had changed. Sand had covered the path, drifted against rocks, transformed familiar contours into something strange. but the acacia tree still stood, and the tent still held, and all of them were safe. That evening, Benjamin spoke what they were all thinking. Tomorrow makes 4 days. Help could arrive as early as tomorrow evening if Eleazar kept his word, and if the men from Beersheba travel quickly. But it could also be longer. Our water is running low. They sat in sober silence, calculating. With careful rationing, they had perhaps 3 more days of water after that. But Ruth spoke up, her young voice clear. Then we will trust. We have been provided for this far. God has not brought us through storm and sickness only to abandon us now. Out of the mouths of children, Deborah thought, or almost children. Ruth was becoming a woman before their eyes, forged by crisis into someone stronger than she had been 4 days ago. The 4th day passed slowly. They moved little, conserving energy and water. Simeon led them in prayers at morning, midday, and evening. Levi was weak but recovering, able to eat small amounts. The waiting was its own test, not of survival, but of faith. The active crises had passed. Now there was only the question of whether help would come and when. Deborah spent much of the day writing in her journal, trying to capture what she was learning before the immediacy of the experience faded. I came seeking to know if God truly knows me, she wrote. I wanted some grand revelation, some unmistakable sign. But what I am learning is that being known by God is not about spectacular moments, but about His presence in ordinary ones. I am known in my choice to stay when I could have left. I am known in my hands fanning a sick child. I am known in my fear about water running out. I am known in this very act of writing, trying to understand, asking questions even here in the desert. She paused, ink hovering over parchment, then continued, and I am beginning to understand that I know others too. I know Ruth's courage and vulnerability. I know Simeon's weathered faith. I know Rachel's desperate love. I know Benjamin's fear and hope. This knowing, this seeing of others is also holy. When we truly see each other, we participate in God's way of seeing. We become, in small measure, the answer to the prayer that we ourselves might be known. Part 3. The Transformation. On the 5th day, as the sun climbed toward noon, and they sat in their rationed shade, sipping their carefully measured water, Deborah heard something. At first, she thought it was imagination or the heat playing tricks on her mind. But then she heard it again, voices, distant but unmistakable, calling out. Benjamin leaped to his feet. They're coming! Help is coming! Within minutes, a group of men appeared on the horizon. 6 of them, leading donkeys laden with water skins and supplies. Eleazar had kept his word. The men from Beersheba had come. The reunion was joyful, but subdued by exhaustion. Water was distributed, fresh food offered, greetings exchanged. The leader of the rescue party was a man named Malachi, a merchant from Beersheba, who had volunteered when Eleazar told the story of the family left behind. We would have come sooner, Malachi said, but the sandstorm delayed us by a day. We were sheltering in a wadi, praying you had found adequate protection. We did, Benjamin said, his arm around Rachel, his other hand resting on Ruth's shoulder, and we had help. These 3 chose to stay with us, strangers though we were. They may have saved my son's life. Malachi looked at Simeon, Ruth, and Deborah with something like awe. Then you are blessed by God, he said simply, and so are we, to witness such kindness. They rested for several hours, replenishing their bodies with water and food, allowing the reality of rescue to settle in. Then, as the afternoon began to cool, they prepared to continue to Beersheba. The journey would take the rest of the day and part of the next, but with adequate water and supplies, it would be safe. As they walked, Deborah found herself beside Malachi. He was perhaps 40, with the weathered face of someone who spent much time traveling trade routes, but his eyes were thoughtful and kind. "You are on pilgrimage?" he asked. "I am, or I was. I am not certain any more what my journey is." Malachi smiled. "Sometimes the pilgrimage we plan becomes a different journey than we expected, but often it is exactly the journey we needed." "I sought understanding," Deborah said. "I wanted to know if God truly knows me, if I matter to Him." "And have you found your answer?" Deborah thought carefully before responding. "I have found part of it. I have learned that being known by God is not separate from being human, from making choices, from serving others. I have learned that His knowledge of me is not distant observation, but intimate involvement. Every moment of my life, even the hardest ones, even the ones where I felt most alone, He was there, knowing me, holding me, even when I could not feel it." "That is no small understanding," Malachi said. "Many people spend their whole lives seeking what you have begun to grasp, but it feels incomplete," Deborah admitted. "Like I have seen part of a great tapestry, but not the whole design. Like I understand with my mind, but not yet fully with my heart." Malachi nodded. "Perhaps that is as it should be. Complete understanding might overwhelm us. We are given glimpses, pieces, enough to walk by faith rather than by sight." The journey continues. They reached Beersheba as the sun was setting the next day. The city rose from the desert like an answer to prayer. Walls, wells, gardens, life sustained in the midst of barrenness. This was the place where Abraham had made his covenant with Abimelech, where Hagar had encountered the angel, where Isaac had dug wells and found water. Malachi's family welcomed them with characteristic desert hospitality. They were given rooms to rest in, fresh clothing, abundant food, and water. Rachel wept with gratitude. Benjamin kept saying, "Thank you," over and over, as if the words alone were inadequate, but all he had to offer. That evening, after bathing and eating and resting, Deborah walked alone to the ancient well at the center of the city. The sun had set, and the first stars were appearing. The well was deep, its water cold and clear, fed by underground springs that had never run dry in all the centuries since Abraham's time. She sat on the stone rim, looking down into the dark water, seeing stars reflected in its surface. This well represented something profound, God's provision, constant and faithful, flowing even in the desert, even when circumstances seemed impossible. "You are the one who stayed," a voice said behind her. She turned to find an old woman approaching, leaning heavily on a staff. The woman was ancient. Her face seamed with countless wrinkles, but her eyes were bright with intelligence. "I am," Deborah said. "I am called Judith," the woman said, lowering herself to sit beside Deborah. "I have lived in Beersheba all my long life, and I have seen many pilgrims come to this well. Some come seeking miracles, some come seeking understanding, some come simply because it is a holy place and they wish to touch something ancient and sacred." "Why do you think I came?" Judith smiled. "You did not come seeking. You were brought here by circumstances you did not choose, but by choices you did make. That is often how God works, not forcing our steps, but opening paths we did not know existed." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Judith said, "There is a story about this well that most pilgrims do not know. When Hagar fled into the desert, pregnant and despairing, she thought she would die. But God met her there, not in the comfortable places, not in the city, but in the wilderness at a spring of water. And He saw her. 'You are the God who sees me,' she said. Elroy, the God who sees. Deborah felt tears spring to her eyes. That is what I have been seeking, to know that I am seen. And now you know it, Judith said gently, not because someone told you, but because you have lived it. In the desert, in the storm, in the choice to stay and serve, you have encountered Elroy, the God who sees. He saw you in your loneliness in Jerusalem. He saw you on the hillside. He saw you at Hebron. He saw you in that desolate place where you chose love over safety. He has always seen you, Deborah, every moment, every thought, every fear and hope and question. How do you know my name? Deborah asked, startled. Judith's smile deepened. Malachi's wife is my granddaughter. She told me about the young woman who stayed behind, but also, she paused, her eyes distant. Sometimes God gives us knowledge we should not naturally have. Sometimes He shows us things about people so that we can speak the words they need to hear. I see you, Deborah bat Joachim. And more importantly, God sees you. He has always seen you. He will always see you. The old woman stood slowly, preparing to leave. But before she did, she placed a weathered hand on Deborah's head in blessing. You sought understanding. You have found the beginning of it. But understanding is not a destination. It is a journey that lasts all our days. Continue walking, child. Continue asking your hard questions. Continue being exactly who God made you to be. The world needs people who see deeply, who ask courageously, who love sacrificially. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Never forget that. After Judith left, Deborah sat alone at the well for a long time. The stars multiplied overhead, countless points of light in the vast darkness, and she thought about everything that had happened since she left Jerusalem. Every conversation, every encounter, every moment of fear and trust and revelation. Slowly, she began to speak the words of Psalm 139 aloud, letting each verse wash over her like water from the ancient well. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. As she spoke, she thought about all the times in recent weeks when she had sat and risen, in her courtyard in Jerusalem, on her hillside sanctuary, at Hebron, in the tent in the desert. Each moment known, each movement perceived by the God who saw everything. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the choices behind her, all the unknown path before her. And she thought about the hand of God, not restraining, but guiding, not controlling, but blessing, present in every step. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. She thought about her attempt to hide in solitude, her feeling that she was too small and insignificant to matter, but there was nowhere she could go where God was not. Not because He was watching to judge, but because He was present to love, to know, to hold. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. She thought about the journey to Hebron, the crisis in the desert, arriving here at Beersheba. Each step guided, each moment held, even when she had not recognized it at the time. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And here, finally, as she spoke these words under the stars at the ancient well, something broke open in Deborah's chest. Not the hollow ache of loneliness that had been her companion for so long, but something else, a fullness, a certainty. a deep and unshakable knowing. She was fearfully and wonderfully made, not despite her questions, but including them. Not despite her solitude, but through it. Not despite her differences, but because of them. God had knit her together with intention, with purpose, with love. Every thread of her being, her mind, her heart, her soul, her particular way of seeing the world, all of it was deliberate design, not accident or mistake. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of homecoming, of finally seeing herself as God saw her, precious, known, loved, purposeful. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. She thought about all the days behind her, the lonely ones, the questioning ones, the difficult ones, all written in God's book before she was born. Not random, not meaningless, but part of a larger story she could not yet fully see. And all the days ahead, unknown to her but known to him, each one held in his awareness, each one part of the pattern he was weaving. She finished the psalm in a whisper. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. It was a prayer of complete surrender, complete trust, not asking to understand everything, but asking to be known fully and to be led faithfully, asking to walk the path God had for her, even when she could not see where it led. She sat there at the well until the night grew late and the city around her fell silent. She sat there letting the truth sink deep into her bones, deeper than intellectual understanding, deeper than emotional relief, into the bedrock of her being where faith lived. When she finally rose and made her way back to Malachi's house, she walked differently. Her steps were lighter, her shoulders straighter. The burden she had carried, the burden of feeling unseen, unknown, unimportant, had been lifted. Not because her circumstances had changed, not because she suddenly fit in better with others, but because she had finally grasped a truth that changed everything. She was known by God, completely, intimately, eternally known. And that knowing was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. For the next morning, Deborah woke with a clarity of purpose she had never felt before. She knew what she needed to do next. She found Simeon breaking his fast in Malachi's courtyard. The old man smiled when he saw her. You look different this morning, child, like someone who has found what they were seeking. I have, Deborah said, sitting beside him. At least, I have found enough of it to know the way forward. Simeon, I want to go with you to Ein-Gedi. I want to see the springs that never run dry. Simeon's eyes lit up. I would welcome the company, and I think you will find the springs speak to your soul in ways you cannot yet imagine. When do you wish to leave? Tomorrow, if Benjamin and his family are well enough to continue their journey without us. They sought out Benjamin and Rachel, who were preparing to travel on to family in a village near Hebron. Levi was nearly recovered, his fever gone, his strength returning. Ruth stood with her family, but when Deborah approached, the girl's eyes were conflicted. You are leaving? Ruth asked. I am continuing my pilgrimage, Deborah said, to Ein-Gedi. But Ruth, she took the girl's hands. You asked me to tell you if I figured out how to know that God sees us. I have learned this. He shows us through each other. When you organized our supplies in the desert, you were God's hands. When your mother prayed over Levi, she was God's voice. When Simeon tended the sick, he was God's presence. We see God by learning to truly see each other, and in seeing each other, really seeing with love and attention, we participate in the way God sees. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I will remember that, and I will remember you. They embraced, and Deborah felt the poignancy of these brief, intense connections that travel brings. People who enter your life for a short time, but leave lasting marks on your soul. Benjamin pressed a small bag of coins into Deborah's hand. For your journey, he said when she tried to refuse, you gave us more than money can repay. But please accept this small token, and know that my family will tell the story of your kindness for generations. You will live in our memories and in the memories of our children's children. The next morning, Deborah and Simeon set out for Ein Gedi. The journey would take 3 days, traveling north and east along ancient trade routes that skirted the Dead Sea. The landscape was harsh, desert and salt and stone, but there was a stark beauty in it that Deborah had learned to appreciate. As they walked, Simeon told stories of his youth, of his long-dead wife, of children scattered across Judea, of a life that had held both great joy and great sorrow. And Deborah told her own story of Jerusalem, of her hillside sanctuary, of feeling invisible, of the journey that had brought her here. You know, Simeon said as they rested in the shade of a rock formation, when I first saw you in the caravan, I thought you were running away from something. But now I see you were running toward something. You just did not know what it was yet. I was running toward understanding, Deborah said, toward knowing that I am known. And have you found it? I have found enough of it to live on, Deborah said carefully. I do not understand everything. I still have questions, doubts, moments when I feel alone. But underneath all of that, there is now a bedrock of certainty. God knows me. He sees me. He has always seen me. And that truth changes everything, even when the feelings fluctuate. They reached Ein Gedi on the 3rd day, arriving in the afternoon when the light was golden and thick. The springs were everything Simeon had promised. Water flowing from the rocks, creating an oasis of green in the midst of barrenness. Date palms and willows grew here, improbable and lush. The sound of water was everywhere, a constant music that spoke of abundance and life. Simeon led her to the main spring, where water bubbled up from deep within the earth and flowed down in a series of small cascades. They removed their sandals and waded into the pool at the spring's base. The water was cool and clear, and Deborah felt it wash away the dust of travel, the weariness of the journey, the last remnants of the old burden she had carried. This is why I come here every year, Simeon said, his voice quiet with reverence, to remember that God's faithfulness is like these springs, constant, life-giving, never failing. Year after year, drought or rain, these waters flow. And year after year, despite my doubts and failures, God's love flows toward me, toward all of us. They stayed at Ein Gedi for 3 days. There was a small community of hermits and seekers who lived near the springs, people who had chosen solitude not as escape, but as a way of seeking God. Deborah spent her days in prayer, in study, in long, silent walks through the wadi, in conversations with the other seekers. One evening, she sat with an old hermit named Matthias, who had lived at Ein Gedi for 20 years. He was copying scrolls of scripture, his work painstaking and beautiful. "Why do you do this?" Deborah asked, watching his careful hand form each letter. "Because the words matter," Matthias said simply. "Each word, each letter, each stroke of the pen. The scriptures are not merely information to be preserved, but living truth to be encountered. When I copy these words, I meditate on them, I absorb them, they become part of me." He showed her the scroll he was currently copying, Psalm 139. Deborah's breath caught. "This psalm has been my companion on this journey," she said. "Then perhaps you are meant to copy it yourself," Matthias said, offering her a blank parchment and writing implements. "Not just read it, not just memorize it, but write it with your own hand. Let each word pass through you slowly, thoughtfully. It is a form of prayer." And so Deborah spent the next day copying Psalm 139. Each word was an act of meditation. Each phrase required her full attention. She thought about what each verse meant, how she had experienced its truth, how it had changed her. When she finally finished, the sun was setting, painting the rocks of Ein-Gedi in shades of rose and gold. She held the completed scroll in her hands, her own copy of the psalm that had transformed her life. This would travel with her, she decided. It would return to Jerusalem with her, a tangible reminder of everything she had learned. That night, lying on her mat in the small shelter the community had provided, Deborah knew her time at Ein-Gedi was complete. She had found the peace she needed, the confirmation she sought. It was time to return home. Part 4. The Return. The journey back to Jerusalem took 8 days. Deborah and Simeon traveled together for the first 3 days until their paths diverged, his toward his village near Hebron, hers continuing north to Jerusalem. Their parting was bittersweet. Simeon had become like a grandfather to her, his weathered faith an anchor she had needed. "You will be well, child," he said, as they embraced in farewell. "You have found what you sought, and now you will live it. That is the real journey, not seeking truth, but living it day by day." "Will I see you again?" Deborah asked. "If God wills it," Simeon said with a smile. "But even if we do not meet again in this life, we have walked together for a time, and that is gift enough. Carry what you have learned. Share it with others who feel unseen. Be the presence of God to those who doubt His presence. That is your calling now." Deborah continued alone, but the solitude no longer felt oppressive. She was comfortable with herself in a way she had never been before. The questions remained. She would always be someone who asked hard questions, but the anxiety beneath the questions had eased. She could hold uncertainty now without it threatening her sense of being known and loved. She stopped at Hebron again, staying once more with Leah at her inn. The widow welcomed her warmly, eager to hear of her adventures. "You seem different," Leah said, as they shared an evening meal. "More at peace. You have found what you sought." "I found myself," Deborah said, "or rather, I found how God sees me," which amounts to the same thing. She told Leah about the desert, about Beersheba, about Ein-Gedi, and Leah listened with the generous attention of someone who understood that sometimes people need to tell their stories, need to speak their transformations aloud to make them real. From Hebron, it was 3 days' journey to Jerusalem. Deborah walked mostly alone, but occasionally falling in with other travelers heading to the holy city. She no longer felt the need to isolate herself completely, but neither did she force connection. She was learning to be herself, sometimes quiet and contemplative, sometimes engaged and conversational. Both were valid. Both were part of who God had made her to be. On the last day of travel, as Jerusalem came into view on its hills, Deborah felt a complex swell of emotions. Joy at returning home, gratitude for the journey, a tender ache for the time away, but most of all a deep certainty that she was returning as a different person than the one who had left. She entered the city through the same southeastern gate she had left by. The streets were familiar, but felt new, as if she were seeing them for the first time. The sounds, the smells, the press of people, all of it felt different, because she was different. She made her way to her father's house. her steps quickening as she drew near. And then she was there, standing in the courtyard, and her father was emerging from the house, his face transforming from surprise to joy as he saw her. "Deborah!" Joachim swept his daughter into his arms, holding her as if to confirm she was real. "You are home. You are safe. Thank God you are safe." They sat in the courtyard, and Deborah told her father everything. Not a brief summary, but the full story. Every detail, every encounter, every revelation. Joachim listened with the patient attention of one who understood that this story needed to be told completely, needed to be honored in its fullness. When she finished, as the evening light faded and the first stars appeared, Joachim was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You left seeking to know if God truly knows you, and you have found your answer. I have, Abba. I am known, completely, intimately, eternally known. And so are you. So is everyone. We are each fearfully and wonderfully made, each thread in a tapestry we cannot yet fully see." Her father's eyes glistened with tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you. She had this same seeking heart, this same courage to ask hard questions. I see so much of her in you." That night, Deborah lay on her familiar sleeping mat in her familiar room, but nothing felt quite the same as it had before, or rather, everything was the same, but she was different, and that changed everything. She thought about all the places she had been, the hillside, Hebron, the desert, Beersheba, Ein Gedi. Each place had taught her something, shaped her, revealed some facet of truth. But the journey had not been about the places. It had been about learning to see herself as God saw her, to know herself as known. The days that followed her return established a new rhythm. Deborah still walked to her hillside sanctuary, but now she went not to escape, but to commune with God in the quiet. She still asked hard questions, but without the desperate edge of someone trying to prove their own existence. She visited Sarah and her family and was welcomed with joy. Sarah embraced her, laughing and crying at once. "I prayed for you every day," Sarah said. "I asked God to show you what you were seeking, and I see in your eyes that He did." Deborah told her story again. She would tell it many times in the coming weeks, each telling helping her understand it more deeply. Miriam listened with her characteristic warmth, asking thoughtful questions. Sarah's father spoke about how the journey reminded him of the patriarch's travels, how sometimes we must leave the familiar to discover the eternal. "You must come to synagogue with us this Sabbath," Miriam said. "The rabbi has been teaching from the Psalms. I think you would have much to contribute to the discussion." And so Deborah found herself, that Sabbath, sitting among the women in the synagogue as the rabbi read. And of all the psalms he could have chosen, he read Psalm 139. As the familiar words filled the space, Deborah closed her eyes and let them wash over her. She had copied these words with her own hand. She had lived them in desert and oasis. She had discovered their truth in crisis and calm. They were no longer just beautiful poetry. They were her story, her testimony, her bedrock. After the service, the rabbi invited discussion. It was unusual for women to speak, but this rabbi was known for his progressive views. And to Deborah's surprise, Sarah raised her hand. "My friend Deborah recently returned from a pilgrimage," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "She has been studying this psalm deeply. Perhaps she would share what she has learned?" All eyes turned to Deborah. A month ago, this attention would have paralyzed her, but now she stood slowly, her heart steady, her voice clear. "I went seeking to know if God truly knows me," she said. "I felt invisible, unseen, as if my life was too small to matter in the vast scope of creation. But through my journey, I learned that God's knowledge of us is not distant observation, but intimate presence. He knows when we sit down and when we rise up. He knows our thoughts before we think them. He knows us more completely than we know. After the service, the rabbi invited discussion. It was unusual for women to speak, but this rabbi was known for his progressive views. And to Deborah's surprise, Sarah raised her hand. "My friend Deborah recently returned from a pilgrimage," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "She has been studying this psalm deeply. Perhaps she would share what she has learned?" All eyes turned to Deborah. A month ago, this attention would have paralyzed her, but now she stood slowly, her heart steady, her voice clear. "I went seeking to know if God truly knows me," she said. "I felt invisible, unseen, as if my life was too small to matter in the vast scope of creation. But through my journey, I learned that God's knowledge of us is not distant observation, but intimate presence. He knows when we sit down and when we rise up. He knows our thoughts before we think them. He knows us more completely than we know ourselves." She paused, looking around at the faces watching her, some curious, some skeptical, some hungry for what she had to say. "In the desert, when I chose to stay with a sick child and his family, I learned that being known by God means we are never truly alone. In Beersheba, at the ancient well where Hagar encountered El Roi, the God who sees, I understood that even our darkest moments are illuminated by his presence. At Ein Gedi, watching water flow constantly from the rock, I learned that his faithfulness never fails, that he knows not just who we are, but who we are becoming." An elderly woman at the back wiped tears from her eyes. A young man leaned forward, listening intently. "The psalm says, 'We are fearfully and wonderfully made,'" Deborah continued, her voice soft but carrying. "I spent so long feeling that I was made wrong, that my questions and my solitude were flaws to be corrected. But I learned that God made each of us with intention. Our differences are not mistakes, but design. We are each a unique thread in a tapestry only He can fully see." She looked at Sarah, who was smiling through tears. "And I learned that when we truly see each other with love, with attention, with grace, we participate in the way God sees. We become His hands and feet and eyes in this world. We help each other know that we are known." The synagogue was silent for a long moment after she sat down. Then the rabbi spoke, his voice thoughtful. "The young woman speaks truth. Thank you, Deborah Bat Joachim, for sharing what God has taught you." Well, the weeks that followed established a new pattern for Deborah's life. She still walked to her hillside each morning, but now others sometimes joined her. Sarah, or young women from the synagogue who had heard her speak, or even older women who found in Deborah a listening ear and a thoughtful heart. She began teaching children the Psalms, helping them memorize the words, but more importantly, helping them understand what the words meant. She told them stories from her journey, making the ancient truths come alive through lived experience. God knows how many hairs are on your head. She told a small girl who felt overlooked in her large family, He knows your name. He sees you even when others do not. God is with you even in scary places. She told a boy who was afraid of the dark, there is nowhere you can go where He is not. Even the darkness is as light to Him. Her father watched these transformations with quiet pride. "Your mother would be so pleased," he told her one evening as they shared their meal. "She always said you would find your purpose. She just knew it would not be the ordinary path." "I am grateful for the ordinary now, Abba," Deborah said. I used to think that significance required something extraordinary, but I have learned that God is present in every ordinary moment, every conversation, every act of kindness, every choice to see and be seen. These are all sacred. Claritat. 1 year after her return, as spring turned to summer and the Festival of Weeks approached again, Deborah found herself once more on her hillside sanctuary. But this time she was not alone. Ruth had come to Jerusalem with her family to celebrate the festival, and the girl, now 13, on the cusp of womanhood, had sought out Deborah. I have thought about you so many times, Ruth said, as they sat beneath the ancient olive tree. About what you said in the desert about God seeing us. It changed something in me. Tell me, Deborah said. I do not feel invisible anymore, Ruth said simply. I still sometimes feel overlooked by my family. That is the nature of being a middle child. But I know now that being unseen by people is not the same as being unseen by God. And knowing that I am seen by Him, it is enough. It changes how I see myself and how I see others. Deborah smiled, feeling the rightness of this moment, the completion of a circle she had not known she was drawing. You have learned what took me much longer to understand, she said. You are wise beyond your years, Ruth. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city below as it prepared for the festival. The temple gleamed in the afternoon sun, and smoke from cooking fires rose like prayers into the still air. Do you still have hard days? Ruth asked. Days when you feel alone or uncertain? I do, Deborah admitted. I still struggle with questions. I still have moments of doubt. But underneath all of that, there is now a foundation that does not shake. I know that I am known, and that knowing, that being held in God's awareness and love, it sustains me through everything else. She pulled out the scroll she had copied at Ein Gedi, now worn soft from frequent reading. Would you like to hear the psalm? She asked. Ruth nodded eagerly, and so Deborah read, her voice carrying the words across the hillside, each phrase resonant with lived experience. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. As she read, she remembered the journey that had taught her these truths, the desert and the storm, Simeon's weathered faith and Rachel's desperate prayers, Hannah on the hillside and Judith at the well. Each encounter a thread in the tapestry, each moment a step toward understanding. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? She remembered the feeling of being hemmed in by loneliness, not understanding yet that God was hemming her in with love, holding her fast even when she tried to hide. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. She remembered the moment at Beersheba when these words had finally penetrated not just her mind, but her heart. When she had finally believed that she was made with intention, that every part of her, even the parts she had thought were flaws, was purposeful design. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. She thought about all the days behind her and all the days ahead, each one known by God before she lived it, each one part of a pattern she could not yet fully see but could trust was there. When she finished reading, Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to make a copy of this psalm too. Will you teach me how? I would be honored, Deborah said. They sat together until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city below them came alive with light as lamps were lit in windows and courtyards. Somewhere, a mother called her children home. Somewhere a father said evening prayers. Somewhere a child fell asleep, feeling safe and loved. And on the hillside, two young women sat beneath an ancient tree, both of them known, both of them seen, both of them held in the vast and intimate awareness of the God who had searched them and found them precious. As night fell completely and the stars emerged one by one, Deborah and Ruth made their way back to the city. They walked slowly, neither wanting to rush this moment, this connection, this shared understanding. At the gate, they parted ways with an embrace. "Thank you," Ruth said, "for staying with us in the desert, for teaching me to see, for showing me that God sees me." "Thank you," Deborah replied, "for reminding me that transformation ripples outward, that when we allow ourselves to be changed, we become agents of change for others." She walked home through familiar streets, greeting neighbors who called out to her, stopping to speak with an elderly widow who was sitting outside her door, sharing a word of encouragement with a young mother struggling to calm a crying baby. Each interaction was a small thread, she thought. Each moment of connection, a stitch in the larger tapestry. And God saw it all. Every word spoken, every kindness offered, every heart touched. Nothing was too small for his attention. Nothing was insignificant in his eyes. When she reached her father's house, Joachim was sitting in the courtyard, his evening prayers finished, his face peaceful in the lamplight. "You were with Ruth?" he asked. "I was, Abba. She wanted to hear the psalm." "And so the teaching continues," Joachim said with satisfaction. "From me to you, from you to Ruth, from Ruth to others. This is how faith is passed down, not through distant instruction, but through lived experience, through stories told and retold, through truth embodied in ordinary lives." Deborah sat beside her father, and together they looked up at the stars, the same stars Abraham had looked upon when God promised his descendants would be as numerous as the lights in heaven, the same stars David had seen when he kept his father's sheep and composed psalms, the same stars that had guided her journey and would guide Ruth's and countless others. "Abba," Deborah said softly, "do you remember when I asked you how God could possibly know every person? When I could not understand how my one small life could matter in the vastness of creation? I remember. I understand now, or at least I understand as much as a human mind can hold. God's knowledge is not limited like ours. He does not know us less because there are many of us. He knows each of us completely, individually, intimately, and somehow, impossibly, wonderfully, that complete knowledge extends to every person who has ever lived or will ever live. We are each known as if we were the only one. We are each precious as if we were his only child." Joachim placed his weathered hand over his daughter's. "You have found wisdom, my child. Not the wisdom of accumulated knowledge, but the wisdom of understanding. Not the wisdom of the mind only, but the wisdom of the heart." They sat in silence for a while, father and daughter, both of them held in the awareness of the God who knew them completely. And in that silence there was peace, not the absence of struggle or question, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you are known, from believing you are held, from trusting you are loved. When Deborah finally rose to go to her sleeping mat, she carried that peace with her. She lay down, looking up at the stars visible through her window, and whispered the prayer that had become as natural as breathing. "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." It was a prayer of surrender, of trust, of complete openness to the God who saw her fully and loved her anyway. who knew her completely and called her his own, who had searched her and found her not lacking but precious, not flawed but fearfully and wonderfully made. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her eyelids she saw light, not the light of lamp or star, but the light of divine presence, the light that had been with her always, even when she could not see it, especially when she could not see it. And as sleep came gently, like a friend's hand on her shoulder, Deborah rested in the certainty that she was known, that she had always been known, that she would always be known. In the morning she would wake and begin another day. She would have her moments of struggle and her moments of joy. She would continue to ask her hard questions and seek her deeper truths. She would teach and learn, serve and be served, see and be seen. But underneath it all, woven through every moment and every breath, would be this unchanging truth. She was known by God, completely, intimately, eternally known. And that knowing was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The God who had searched her from the beginning of time had found her, and finding her, had called her his own. And in that calling, in that knowing, in that divine recognition, she had finally found herself. The quiet of Jerusalem night, as the city slept and the stars kept their ancient watch, one young woman rested in the arms of peace. Her questions had led her on a journey. Her journey had led her to truth, and truth had led her home, not just to Jerusalem, but to herself, and to the God who had been waiting there all along, saying, I know you, I see you, I have always known you, I will always see you, you are mine, and I am yours. Rest now, beloved, rest in the certainty that you are known. And she did. If you enjoyed this journey through the ancient lands where faith was forged and tested, click the video on your screen now to discover another story from Scripture's sacred pages where hope and transformation await. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us. May you rest tonight in the knowledge that you too are known, are seen, are held by the God who searches every heart and finds each one precious. May the peace of His presence surround you as sleep comes gently, and may you wake tomorrow with the certainty that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Shalom, peace, rest.